Hello and welcome. It's funny because I'm actually going to be reading something for a start this time. So, whoever's listening to this, welcome to the Open Book Club. Super thrilled to have you join. My hope is that this is going to be a very enriching discussion, and as well as my super duper hopes that you get value from this, and my hopes that are even higher than that is that you actually join us for an open discussion for the Open Book Club on the 24th of April at 8 p.m. So you'll definitely be able to see some information somewhere on yonder on this video. So if you're here for the first time, if you've never heard us share anything ever, or you're a returning listener, I bid you a hello and I bid you a greetings. And our goal here is just to share some insights and certainly some enthusiasm of the book at hand. Now, before we dive in a little bit deeper, please do not forget to subscribe. Do not forget to stay updated by hitting that bell icon, just to continue being open to our discussions. Now, today we are going to be delving into a monumental work, a very substantially large work on Persian or of Persian literature called The Conference of the Birds. And it's brought to us through a beautiful translation, as there's many translations of this book by Charles Stanley Knott. Now, the original work by the poet Attar is not only a literary achievement, but a profound allegorical journey towards understanding. And Attar, and I'm going to say it in a little bit of a different way here, Attar, or Farid ad-Din, or Attar of Nishapur, a master Sufi poet. He uses this form of narration and narrative to explore deep philosophical and spiritual themes. Each bird in this tale certainly does symbolize many different things, and definitely a human characteristic that ultimately reflects our own life's journey. And as mentioned earlier, you will find many different translations of this book. Again, this work first was originally composed in 1177. What a great year! And now published again by C.S. Knott in 1954. So there's definitely a little bit of time in between. C.S. Knott, I think it does bear merit to say that he was an author, a publisher, a translator, and funny enough, and was a student of G.I. Gurdjieff, who I'm very fascinated by as a enigmatic character over the last 100 plus years. Um, C.S. Knott's work certainly helps us bridge a cultural and temporal divide, bringing Attar's insight without a shadow of a doubt to a very modern audience. So we're going to gear up, get ready to explore this intricate text. And I want to kind of start off this discussion. And it's funny because this is all written down. And rather than just getting Antoine and Osama's insights and my insights, I would love to ask you both, like, what do you feel that Attar is attempting, certainly through symbols in many different ways, in this book, in this journey?
Wow. Thank you for the introduction. I like that. I like the new intro. That's awesome. We're official now, guys. We're official. No, I'm joking. Um, one thing to point out also about Attar, Attar, is that the name means um, the perfumer, right? The person who makes perfume. So that's one way of it. And also, Attar is a person who makes um, like or sells spices, or herbalist also can be a way. An alchemist can be a way in order to understand that name. So, and typically the name is in the Middle East. Um, Most of the time, family names are from a profession, right? So his family, probably that was their craft, that was their profession. I don't know if that's in his case, or maybe he got that name from from the poetry that he's doing. But typically, that's what it is. So that's a cool thing. right? Just by the last name, you get to know what the craft of the family is. Um, and how symbolic for that name, you know, the perfumer or the alchemist or the herbalist to be giving, um, passing down these gems, right? And I think it's befitting of that name if we understand name to mean character, right? Because that's really what name means. Name means a character. What's that character? And if we even go with that, how befitting to receive what's in this book, which I think it's his most famous book probably, or work, to receive that in that light. What do I believe to be his, or what is he trying to do with that work? I think that maybe the obvious one is really passing down this knowledge of the way, as he puts it in the book, right? Or as it's translated, or knowledge of the tariqah, the path, um, what it entails, how to prepare the initiate to move in, um, to move on the way, and also to give an approximation of the way also, right? So I think there's multiple, obviously multiple dimensions to it, um, but for me reading it, that's what it felt like. It felt like, okay, there's this man, this master, this teacher who went through some type of, he went through his process, and he was like, okay, what's the best way for me to pass down this knowledge to either my students or to the next generation? And the best way he found to be, which is his craft as a writer, is to write poetry and stories, and stories through poetry and symbology. So it's definitely a manuscript. It's a treasure map. That's what it is. That's what it is. It's a treasure map. Last week I was down. You guys know this. I was in Florida, and I was playing with the IS kids. Right, they're three kids. Two, Taji and Mimi, are 4 years old, and Kaya is 6. And they came to me. It's like, oh, can we play pirates or whatever? I don't know what they called it. Can you draw a treasure map? Right, this going through the cave, going under the rainbow, going through the zombie cemetery, going through the lake with alligators, until at the end there's the treasure, and we got to get the treasure and the key and da-da-da. So this to me felt like that. It felt like a treasure map. It felt like, here's the map, and here's what you'll find on the way. There's going to be a cave. There's going to be a lake with alligators. There's going to be a mountain that it's this high, whatever. There's going to be this, and that. But here's the map, and these are the instructions. This is how you go through these obstacles until finally you reach your treasure.
Jeez, that was beautiful, man. Thank you for sharing and saying all that. And yeah, Abe, thank you for the introduction and letting them know that our that the Open Book Club is going to be on the 24th at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's what's up. Um, so to the question, right? Like your question was, what do I think Attar was trying to do with this work? Man, I mean, what can I say that like Abe? I mean, that Osama hasn't already like put in beautiful words. Let's see. Uh, yeah, I mean, he said it like this treasure map. But one thing I saw right with this treasure map is him showing us that we ultimately are the treasure. And while we are the treasure, there is still some work to do in knowing ourselves as the treasure, and knowing ourselves as, um, what should I call it? The Sigmore? Seymour? How do you pronounce it? Um, can you say it for me? Seymour? Sigmore?
I would have to, yeah, I would have to, where is it? I gotta find the word. See, yeah, Sigma,
Sigmore.
which actually it's a play on word
Yeah,
also.
that's what I kind of wanted to get at. Like, this idea of like, on all levels of this piece, he closed the loop, showing us that we're ultimately journeying to ourself, and to see that in, like you said, the play on words, Seymour or Sigmore, meaning 30 or something like that, and how in the original language, and how, I don't know if I should say, actually, maybe I shouldn't say that, because if they haven't read yet, am I giving anything away? Like what? No, no, right? Oh, so how he closed that loop with what they were looking for, meaning 30, and at the end of the treasure hunt, um, them 30 of them seeing themselves for the first time, and this idea, or in what once was an idea of God, or once was an idea of like this grand celestial being. He closed the loop in the way he wrote it, showing that ultimately, um, the journey is to know ourselves as God, but not God in the sense of like, oh, my personality knows myself as God, or my intellect knows myself as God, but like in the being, in the bliss of it, in the grandeur and the majesty of it, to know ourselves as that from being it. Um, and I think the grandeur of the King of all birds is speaking to that primordial collective consciousness that is the source, course, and goal of what I consider all our lives. What he so beautifully illustrated in his book. Um, Seymour Sigmore was the source, the course, and the goal of the whole experience of the birds, of the conference of the birds, and ultimately of our lives. Um, but not but and what really stuck out for me was how, basically, through all the excuses that the birds were giving not to know themselves in that way, not to take that journey into becoming what they really were or are, we can see the excuses that come up in our own lives when we know that we're not like stepping or leaning into, whatever the journey is for each of us individually, as fully as possible. I could see that in the excuses that some of the birds were making, and then how some of the birds understood after a while that now this journey is worth it. Somehow it's worth it, and getting to the end and realizing like, oh, I'm I'm what was worth it. This experience of knowing myself, more fully or more completely, is what was worth this journey, which is why we're all here. We're all on it. Another thing that, I think he was doing through this was showing us that like the things that come up during this journey that ultimately divide us is again an opportunity for connection, for seeing ourselves, like how, I guess, an analogy of the Muslim older guy and the Christian younger female who, um, you know, despite whatever odds that they tried to put, or that she or he tried to put there, um, they made it to one another. Like the the superficial surface level of their religions was sort of showcased and transcended to the ultimate oneness. And that analogy and how on this journey it might come up for us that like we are challenged with the tradition and the cultures of what religion might look like in the mainstream, but to ultimately get to that place it might look like having to transcend some of the inherited knowledge and cultural norms that we were birthed into or that was projected upon us because of our environments. It might look and be something other than what we know it as. And I think those kind of analogies that he displayed for us and illustrated so beautifully showcase that the connection, um, the connection to bridge the dividing different cultures and stuff like that. Okay, that's enough that I'll say about that. Abe, throwing it back to you. How would you answer the question you gave to us?
You guys both express things so valid, beautiful, and that I cannot not agree with. I think to sum it up, to me, is the soul's journey. It is the soul's journey. I'll keep it at that. And Osama referencing a map, and Antoine, you, in my humblest opinion, also referencing a map, but also a shedding of a lot of things to kind of find out who you really are. It's that. And it's funny because years ago I was presented the opportunity to read this version of the book prior to going to a retreat. And fast forward to this time. So I've never read the poem itself or as close to a translation of the poem, where in the version that we're reading, translated by C.S. Knott, is it's more a easier read and quote unquote easier read than the actual poem itself. But to go back to what is he trying to point to, or what comes up for me, I'm gonna share it from that angle. Is me, because again I'm reflecting based on what the poem has to my own life, witnessing and seeing all of my parts, quote unquote, growing and gaining this level of maturity as best as I possibly can, because that in and of itself is the journey for me, I believe. And you use the word, Antoine, transcendence, which is like a whole new, it's almost like this whole new playing field to get to. So to not give the the the, the bread, the whole loaf away for somebody who's going to be digesting this book, to relate it directly to me, it does seem to be a crystal clear map of potentially what the soul's journey could be.
I love that. And even like in the bunch of commentaries and all that kind of stuff in regards to this book, and not necessarily this translation, but like the Conference of the Birds, the poem. That's pretty much how it's really understood as, right? It's kind of like a symbology of this, the seven valleys, symbolic to the seven stations of the soul or the ego. um I want to point to two things that you guys talked about before we. I don't know if you have other questions that you have written, but before we go into there, um two things. One, the story of the sheikh and the Christian woman. That one, I know we talked about it briefly, Antoine, some maybe last week or a week before. But that story really stood out to me because in the underline of it is what you shared, Antoine, which is okay, how can uh, the differences be um, like, how can we take away the differences in a way, right? Where love can lead the way, right? But if we read it from like the surface level, it can be missed. Like that undertone can be missed, and one can read it and be like, oh, this sheikh who, had a dream, he's, bowing down to an idol, goes to Greece, loses, quote unquote, loses his faith because he falls in love with this Christian woman, you know, this beauty, pretty much. His disciples are like, yo, what are you doing? Go back on the path, right? Like they saw it as our sheikh, our leader, our teacher, our master lost his way. He went on, sidetracked, and they're trying to save him. They left him, went back, saw his other friend. He was like, yo, how you guys leave him? You guys are bad disciples. You should have all became Christian with him. Let's go back and get him. And then they finally, quote unquote, saved him or brought him back to the path. And then she follows him, right? Now, and this is kind of what we talked about, Antoine, earlier. One, in order to allow for love to operate, right, there's a level of allowing it, because in that moment he could have easily talked himself out of it, or listen. So his disciples in that way were the sound of reason, right? They were symbolic, symbolic in a way that they were the sound of reason. Hey, you've walked this path, da 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 da. What are you doing over here? Like you're just losing it. What are you doing? You're on the ground, throwing dirt on your face. Like, what's happening? This woman doesn't even want you. She came down, told you you're too old, bro. Like, move on, right? Which is that's the sound of reason, right? Reason would say some stuff like that. Reason would say, like, yo, what are you doing? Get back. You work too hard to be at this station, quote unquote. You work too hard to be at this consciousness state or whatever it is for now to, to get sidetracked. But internally, there was an allowance for love to be fully, to operate from there, right? So that, to me, that stood out, and a level of knowing deeply that regardless of my walk, I will reach my destination. Regardless of it, I'm reaching my destination. So there's a level of trust in the divine plan that's like, unquestionable whatsoever. It's like I'm going, and I'm completely going to, quote unquote, lose myself, meaning I'm going to lose my reason. I'm going in. That's it. I'm going to let this love overtake overtake me. I'm going to be possessed with it. I'm going to be drunk in it. I'm just going to walk. People outside going to think I'm crazy. I'm throwing dirt on my face. My status of being a sheikh, of being a master or a teacher is no more. It's in the ground. I'm sleeping in the pig's pit. Um, like I'm going. Outside is like, what's happening? Inside is just like love is just leading the way. So that story really stood out to, like, it really stood out to me because of, how one can interpret it either as like, oh yeah, good thing he had his other friend to come and save him and yada yada yada, you know. But on the other hand, it's this man was transformed by it. Like, he's just transformed by allowing himself to be possessed and taken by love. And I think I think he mentions that, um, in few places in the book, um, where he says, like, get rid of that which makes you afraid, then either road will be good. Right? Get rid of that thing that makes you afraid, then either roads will be good. It don't matter. Right? So there's this theme of there isn't a fixation. It's a either way, you're gonna get to that destination, but get rid of that which you're afraid of. Like, oh, I'm afraid of this. That's what you're going after. That's the way. That's the one that's what that's the gate that you got to go through. So that was one thing that you brought up, Antoine, that kind of, you know I wanted to touch on. And the other thing is the quest, or as he put it, which is like the first valley, right? Like, we're gonna it's a journey to know ourselves, and in return know God, know the divine. My question is, what is it that makes people, or somebody, what is it that would make somebody say, I'm going on this journey? Right? Because like you said, like, these birds had their reasons. Some of them were like, yo, life is good. Everything is good. I'm an eagle. I'm a this, I'm a that. I'm good. I'm living. I'm too pretty. I'm too this. Like, all these birds have their own reasons of why not to participate. Now, why not to go on this journey? So for us, my question is, what is it that would make somebody say, I'm gonna walk? And that's something that I'm thinking about. Like, and it's a genuine question. Like, what is it?
And this is me, of course, jumping in without an answer. This is not an answer coming. This is me playing with such a profound question, right? Because it is such a profound and amazing question. Like, what is that internal something that drives us toward this journey and towards God, or what we're classifying as God? Because who knows? What so many people have so many understandings of what term God should mean or does mean or means to them, but whatever that thing is, whatever that is, you know, I don't, for someone to make the choice, right? Because ultimately, like, what are they choosing at first, right? Because oftentimes people are choosing from something that's been projected upon them, and their so-called search for God is really just living out other people's projection of what they should be doing. And then a lot of times what I've seen is that a person has been through so much trauma that they're like, okay, well, if God, Jesus, Allah, Buddha, whoever, the Vedic deities, whoever, somebody help me. One of y'all. And usually that's the one that's been most profoundly connected to your culture and been projected onto you. You project that garment of God onto it, right? And then whatever that path or faith says, you start diligently finding it. And you know how they say all roads lead to Rome? Like, it's this phrase that is probably a horrible phrase to use, but I get it in the sense that, like we said earlier, that if we want to try the model that God is the source, course, and goal, then really it's the part of God within us returning to itself, or the part of God that we are disconnected from calling itself home. And I think that spark is what, at some point in time in this one life or many lives, if you believe in reincarnation, that has that being go through this journey of like, you know what, I'm about to go through this journey to know myself greater. And at the end of that, they find, whatever their expression of God is, with according to the framework that we just read about, and the framework that I'm coming from, will ultimately be the most honest rendering of themselves, the themselves beyond what they understand their personality to be, their intellect to be, their emotions to be, the self that is sharing existence with every other self in existence. Um, and so I guess that's what I would have to say about that. And of course, oftentimes I'm coming from this model of Vedic science that talks about how, depending on, there's this relationship between the individual physiology and the cosmos, and the planets and astrology, and how the planets have a certain effect on our lives. And according to that model, karma and dharma is playing a role in how we express in our becoming while we're existing on the planet. And oftentimes, how we express in our becoming, whether it looks like we're on a path or not on the path, it is driving us to a greater becoming of ourself. Even when we're doing things that trip us up, things that might not look right or might look messed up, in that model, it is designed to eventually awaken us to ourselves. These influences of the planet, influences of the people, places, and things around us. According to this model, existence is flowing in one direction, and that's towards bliss, eternal bliss consciousness. And it's curving back on itself, creating again and again, manifesting again and again. And in this grand uh, macro view of what existence, the universe, or God is doing, each of us in our own life, in our own mind, in our physiology, to the cellular structure, everything is reflecting that curve back on itself, creating again and again. And based on what impressions we've gotten in and on us, that is what we end up living out. And eventually, it breaks us into this idea of like, oh, I am on this journey to collect myself back to myself. I'm being either pulled by this grander version of myself, or I'm compelled towards it from inside myself. But ultimately, it's the Seymour again. It's that you, smaller s self, knowing itself again as this big S self, or God, or being. That was a long winded. That's what I got to say about it. Not that it's the truth. It's just models and models that I use and frameworks that I use from my experience or what I've learned from other stuff. What about you? Think? How would you answer that question, Abe?
I don't know the answer, which is should have said that in the first 20 seconds of the call. So there's going to be probably a lot of repetition of what you shared. To start off, to answer that question of, and I want to make sure that I heard it correctly, it's almost like, what is that catalyst for change to happen? Yeah. For me, in my life, and again, I'm only using my own life because it's a truly subjective experience, so there may be relatability to both of you or the listeners to some degree. um, More often than not, it's been pain More often than not, it's been a longing. More often than not, it has been, and I shared this concept with you, albeit briefly today, Osama, a spiritual emergency to some degree that were catalysts to either bring about a whole new form of awareness, bring about the courage to open a door that I've never opened before, or bring about this level of unshakable like audacity to like say, hey, I something's got to give, but I don't know what it is. And then that more often than not gives me the space to open up books, to go through, Antoine, you said it beautifully here, the cultural index of my own upbringing to get closer to certain things that make me feel safe, and then still shake it off, or maybe even having a completely new understanding of it, all to just, again, subjectively bend back to come to a state of remembrance again and again and again. And in the poem version of this book, which we will not be fully covering in the call, so don't expect us to go through all the poems. But if you have some time, feel free to read it. There is a line which goes like this, and it may be in the book as well. Whatever happens, burn in those bright flames, and shut your eyes and soul to earthly claims. Then, as you burn, whatever pain you feel, remember God will recompense your zeal. When you perceive his hidden secrets, give your life to God's affairs and truly live. At last, made perfect in reality, you will be gone and only God will be. When in those states, from my own experience, there's certainly moments where there is this sense of I'm here and I'm here. And neither is wanting to take control or hijack the experience of life. They're perfectly coexisting in oneness where neither or is tugging a rope or taking away. And this beauty and this union that happens, that's the thing that a lot of times the emergencies that I go through in my life in the moments of pain um, kind of seek out. And there's this almost this delicate unveiling of it, or a veil gets stripped away, and either by my own doing, which could be done by laziness, could be done by focusing my energy and time and effort to other avenues, ironically enough, usually always come back and circle back again and again. So bending back on itself, bending back on itself, bending back on itself. And the last point that I want to share, as we're beyond the time cap, so I want to make sure we're at that time note. The the time that I was proposed to read this book, the first taste that I got of this book, the individual that shared it with me used to say a phrase: transcend and include, transcend and include, transcend and include. And in the morning, having a conversation with Osama about transformation and transmutation, what are the differences? And I wanted to share this because it's kind of coming up again today, outside of just my dad telling me and Osama about being the fool, the foolish person today, or whatever came up from that conversation. But I think in this book, there is this level of remembrance. And through that, there's moments of transformation. And there is a difference between both of those words, which uh, took me a second to really reflect on. Transforming means to change something's form, nature, or function. But transmutation means to change something into a higher element or thing. And there's this like simultaneous dance that happens where you are yourself, but you're also entering the realm of this higher thing in which you are. So in that dance, pain has been a catalyst for it. Pain has been something that lit the friction to go. But when I'm entering that space, I realize that friction was never really there to begin with. Or maybe it was just the tinder to light the flame that always was. So if I can consistently remember and remember again, it would be a very obvious thing to an obvious state to enter, God willing, of course, as I'm not there. But again, don't know the answers, but that's something that kind of that's the dance that comes up for me. No. So any final thoughts?
incredibly beautifully. Yeah, yeah. Thank you. That was incredibly beautifully expressed, and I just wanted to throw this in there too because we hadn't really touched on it. I'll be really quick. Also, one of the things that possibly drives me and probably drives so many other people too is bliss and joy and pleasure towards that spark. I don't want to like leave that out, right? Because when a musician is playing their music and they go into that flow state, or when someone's meditating, or when someone's making love, these other avenues that also spark it as well. But like you, often it's been for me some pain, but I've had some taste of bliss and pleasure and things that also definitely put me in an exalted place of divine ecstasy.
That's the case for me as well, right? And I think that's it's probably a theme. Um, However, pain alone doesn't do it, right? Like, because if that's the case, you know, there's so many ways to deal with that pain, quote unquote, right? Um, However, I knew for me the part that, or the moment that was like, oh wait, this is an actual serious thing that now is going to be for the rest of my life. Like, it was really, like, literally a moment where, and I described it to you guys before, and I described it to, the way that I describe it to people is that I literally saw a mountain in front of me that I'm about to climb. Like, so it was a thrilling experience, it was a scary experience, and it was an experience of awe. As if I'm standing in front of, like, Mount Everest and about to climb it. I know I can die on the way. I know I may not get to the summit. I know it's going to be hard. I know it's going to be tough to this and that. However, looking up there, I was like, oh, wait a second, it's worth it. And the reason why I knew it was worth it is because in that, going deeper within that pain, I reached a point of allowing myself to look at myself face to face. And there it was like, whoa, hello, nice to meet you. Like, so finding that, it was like, oh, wait a second, what's more? Like, what is this? What is this now? What's happening here? This is a new introduction. Let me, I want to know you a little bit more. So, which is really interesting, is that's what self-knowledge is, right? To know oneself. And that's what, in this book, also talking about, um, maybe not word for word, but this concept of, to know yourself, be yourself. So being is, you can't escape it, right? That's the, in the tradition, the saying that the divine was a hidden treasure and loved to know itself. So he became into existence, right? It's being, like, he birthed being into existence, right? So to know, be, um, which I know, we're running at a time, but this is the concept that you just shared, Abe, about the fool, right? That your dad mentioned today, and this and that, and in the book talking about the holy fool. Can I be a fool, but a fool of God, in God, to God, the divine, the essence, truth, a fool in truth, to truth, of truth? And though I love, this is one thing that I highlighted in the book, this description of this holy fool, this description of Like you, because there is a sense of you really got to be a fool in order to climb Mount Everest. Like there's some foolishness involved, right? Or to climb the mountain of the self, or to climb, or to go to the way of, the beloved, or whatever it is, or all of that. There's some foolishness involved in it. And one thing that I highlighted was in the book where he said they cannot tell if the way is good or bad. They only know how to act. That to me was like, I highlighted and I like put a circle around it, kind of a thing, like stars next to it, all that kind of stuff. Because for someone who can sometimes be paralyzed by options and ways, is it this one or is it that one? Is it here? Is it there? They cannot tell if it's good or bad. They only know how to act, which is being, because being it's an action that's involved in it. The creator is infused in being, right? Um, so I just wanted to point that, kind of throw this in the mix for whoever is listening, and for us in this discussion of how can I be a holy fool in my life? How can the holy fool show up? How can the musician, the holy fool musician, show up in my life? The holy fool artist show up in my life? The holy fool poet, the holy fool therapist, the holy fool, how can that show up in my life?
Beautifully expressed, beautifully shared. Um, and thank you both for expressing your truths, sharing the things that came up for you. And I think this is a nice point to wrap, and this is a nice point to let anybody know who's listened up to this point. If you want to dialogue with us and share your insights, please join the Open Book Club, which is open to everybody. And the meeting is going to be on April 24th, 2024 at 8 p.m. Eastern. And you can look up simply babalilm.org. So BABALILM.org. Actually, that is correct. Yes. It's funny because I was spelling that out. I'm used to typing these things out. But regardless of it, probably wherever this video is, you'll notice there's going to be links somewhere. So click them, join them, be open, and you may be foolish along the way, but the insights will never stop coming. So join us. Much love. Thank you all. And we look forward to seeing you soon.